The cruelest betrayals are never committed by strangers. They come from the people who once promised to protect you. Sophia Carter stared at the document lying on the kitchen table, unable to understand what she was reading. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows of the small rental house she had been struggling to keep ever since her divorce. The overhead light cast a pale glow across the room, illuminating the stack of overdue bills beside her untouched cup of coffee. For months, life had felt like a series of closed doors. Every paycheck disappeared before it arrived. Every morning brought another reminder of how much she had lost. Yet nothing could have prepared her for this. The paper in front of her was not a bill. It was not a legal notice. It was an agreement. Her ex-husband's signature sat clearly at the bottom of the page. Ryan Carter. The same man who had once stood beside her beneath white wedding flowers and promised they would face every hardship together. Sophia's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Across from her, Ryan avoided eye contact. He looked exhausted. His expensive watch was gone. His designer jackets had disappeared months ago. Even his confidence seemed to have vanished. Debt had stripped away every illusion he once carried. Yet somehow, seeing him broken did not make her feel better. It only made her tired. "Tell me this is not real," she whispered. Ryan rubbed his forehead and stared at the floor. The silence lasted several seconds, long enough for her to understand the answer before he spoke. "I did what I had to do." The words landed harder than a shout. Sophia laughed once, a hollow sound filled with disbelief. "You did what you had to do?" Her eyes drifted back to the paper. Every line seemed more impossible than the last. Somewhere in the complicated legal language was the reality she could not escape. Ryan had entered into an arrangement involving her future without her knowledge, without her permission, without even the basic respect of asking her opinion. Rainwater streaked down the glass behind him. The house suddenly felt smaller, colder. Ryan finally looked at her. "You do not understand how bad things got." Sophia stared at him. For years she had listened to excuses. Business failures. Risky investments. Promises that next month would be different. Next year would be different. Everything had always been waiting for some future that never arrived. "No," she said quietly. "I think I understand perfectly." Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but stopped when headlights swept across the front window. Both of them turned instinctively toward the street. A long black luxury sedan slowly pulled into the driveway. Its polished surface reflected the rain and porch light like liquid silver. Neither of them recognized the vehicle. The engine shut off. The driver remained inside. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Sophia felt a strange chill run through her. Something about the arrival felt deliberate, important, as though the next chapter of her life had just parked outside her front door. Ryan's expression changed instantly. Fear flickered across his face. Not guilt. Not regret. Fear. Sophia noticed it immediately. Then the rear passenger door of the sedan opened. A figure stepped out into the rain. Too far away to identify. Too distant to see clearly. Yet somehow, watching the silhouette approach the house, Sophia felt the unmistakable sensation that everything she believed about her past was about to change. The figure never entered the house. Instead, a sharply dressed driver carrying a black umbrella approached the front porch alone and knocked twice. The sound echoed through the small living room. Ryan immediately stood up. Sophia noticed the tension in his shoulders. It was the same look he used to have when creditors called in the middle of the night. The driver stepped inside after Ryan opened the door. Rainwater glistened on his polished shoes. Without introducing himself, he handed Ryan a sealed envelope. "Instructions from my employer," he said calmly. Ryan accepted it with trembling fingers. Sophia watched every movement. The driver then turned toward her. Unlike Ryan, he looked directly into her eyes. His expression remained professional, but there was something unusual about it. Respect. Not pity. Not judgment. Respect. "Ms. Carter," he said, "a vehicle will arrive tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. You are invited to accompany us." Sophia almost laughed. Invited? The word sounded absurd after everything that had happened. The driver nodded. My employer insists that your comfort and preferences be accommodated. Ryan quickly opened the envelope. His eyes scanned the contents. Whatever he read caused the color to drain from his face. This was not part of the arrangement, he muttered. The driver remained still. The terms have been updated. Sophia folded her arms. For the first time since the nightmare began, curiosity pushed through her anger. Who is your employer? She asked. The driver offered a polite smile. I am not authorized to discuss that. With that, he left. The black sedan disappeared into the rain moments later. Silence filled the house again. Sophia looked at Ryan. What was in the letter? Ryan folded the papers too quickly. Nothing important. She stared at him. 11 years of marriage had taught her exactly when he was lying. Then let me see it. No. The answer came too fast. Too sharp. Sophia stepped closer. Ryan looked away. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she noticed something she had not seen before. Fear was no longer the strongest emotion on his face. Regret was. That realization unsettled her more than anything. Late that night, after Ryan finally left, Sophia sat alone in the kitchen. The rain had stopped. The world outside seemed unusually quiet. An old cardboard box rested beside the refrigerator. It contained the few belongings she never unpacked after the divorce. Photographs. Greeting cards. Pieces of a life that felt increasingly distant. She opened the box and began sorting through it. Near the bottom, she found a photograph she had not seen in years. The edges were worn. The image showed a younger version of herself standing beside a man at a charity gala. Tall. Confident. Dark hair. A smile that seemed effortless. Alexander Hayes. The sight of the photograph stopped her cold. 7 years had passed since she last heard his name. 7 years since he vanished from her life without explanation. She stared at the picture for a long time before slipping it back into the box. Some memories were easier left untouched. Yet as she closed the lid, she could not shake the strange feeling growing in her chest. Tomorrow, a mysterious stranger wanted to meet her. Ryan was terrified. Expensive cars kept arriving at her door. And somehow, for reasons she could not explain, the face she had spent years trying to forget had suddenly returned to her thoughts. Outside, the clouds finally began to part. A thin beam of moonlight crossed the kitchen floor as if pointing toward a future she could not yet see. At exactly 9 o'clock the next morning, the black sedan returned. Sophia had barely slept. The photograph of Alexander Hayes remained on her kitchen counter where she had left it the night before. More than once, she had considered throwing it away. Instead, she found herself staring at it every time she passed through the room. The man in the picture belonged to another life. A life before Ryan. Before debt. Before disappointment became a daily routine. Yet somehow his memory felt closer than it had in years. The driver stepped out and opened the rear passenger door. Good morning, Miss Carter. Sophia glanced one final time at the small house behind her. The peeling paint. The overgrown lawn. The mailbox leaning slightly to one side. She had spent years fighting to survive here. Years trying to rebuild herself after the collapse of her marriage. Leaving felt strangely emotional. Not because she loved the place. Because it represented everything she had endured. The drive lasted nearly 40 minutes. The city slowly disappeared behind them. Busy streets gave way to tree-lined roads, then private estates hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. Sophia watched the scenery through the tinted window without speaking. The driver remained professional and silent. Whoever employed him clearly valued privacy. Eventually, the sedan approached a massive wrought iron gate. Security personnel nodded immediately as the vehicle rolled forward. No questions. No delays. Beyond the entrance stretched a winding road bordered by manicured gardens and towering oak trees. Sophia had never seen anything like it. The property seemed less like a residence and more like a private resort. Fountains sparkled in the morning sunlight. Sculpted hedges lined the pathways. Everything appeared impossibly perfect. The sedan finally stopped in front of an enormous stone mansion overlooking a lake. For several seconds, Sophia simply stared. The house was breathtaking. Yet instead of feeling impressed, she felt uneasy. Why would someone with this kind of wealth care about her? The driver stepped out and opened her door. Please follow me. Sophia climbed the wide stone staircase. The front doors opened before she reached them. Inside, polished marble floors reflected sunlight pouring through towering windows. The air smelled faintly of fresh flowers and cedarwood. Staff members moved quietly through the halls with practiced efficiency. No one looked surprised to see her, as though her arrival had been expected for a very long time. The driver guided her through a series of elegant rooms before stopping near a sunlit courtyard. Please wait here, he said. Then he disappeared. Sophia stood alone beside a fountain. Water flowed gently over white stone. Birds chirped somewhere in the gardens beyond. The peaceful atmosphere felt almost unreal compared to the chaos of the previous 24 hours. Then she heard laughter. Children's laughter. Bright, joyful, unrestrained. She turned instinctively toward the sound. Two children raced into the courtyard from the opposite side. A boy and a girl, around 7 years old. Their small footsteps echoed across the stone path as they chased one another around the fountain. Neither child noticed her at first. Sophia smiled despite herself. There was something wonderfully ordinary about them. Then the little girl stopped suddenly. Her eyes widened. The boy froze beside her. Both children stared directly at Sophia. The smile slowly vanished from her face. A strange sensation settled in her chest. The girl's eyes were blue, the exact shade of her own. The boy's smile carried a familiarity she could not explain. The children exchanged a glance before running toward her. Mom, the little girl whispered. Sophia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. For several seconds, Sophia could not move. The little girl's voice seemed to echo through the courtyard long after the word had been spoken. Mom. Such a simple word. Yet it struck her with the force of a memory she could not fully reach. The two children stopped directly in front of her. Their faces were bright with hope. Familiar hope. The kind children carried when they believed they had finally found someone they had been missing. Sophia's heart raced. She looked from the girl to the boy and back again. The similarities were impossible to ignore now. The girl's blue eyes mirrored her own. The boy's smile carried something strangely recognizable. Neither child looked afraid. They looked relieved, as though seeing her had answered a question they had been asking for a very long time. Emma, Ethan. A calm voice drifted across the courtyard. The children immediately turned. Sophia felt her breath catch. A woman in her 60s approached from a nearby garden path. Her silver hair was neatly styled. Her elegant posture suggested years of confidence and grace. Yet her eyes revealed surprise. Real surprise. She had not expected this encounter to happen so soon. The children rushed toward her. Grandma, look, the little girl said excitedly. She is here. The older woman glanced at Sophia. For a brief moment, something emotional flickered across her face. Then it disappeared behind a composed smile. Children, perhaps we should give our guest a moment to settle in. The twins reluctantly stepped back. Sophia barely heard the conversation. Her attention remained fixed on them. Emma and Ethan. Even their names stirred something uncomfortable inside her. Questions she could not yet answer. Miss Carter, the older woman said gently. My name is Margaret Hayes. Sophia immediately recognized the surname. Hayes. The same name from the photograph hidden in her box. The same name she had not spoken aloud in 7 years. Margaret seemed to notice the reaction. Please, she said softly, come inside. The mansion felt even larger from within. Family portraits lined the hallways. Sunlight spilled across polished wooden floors. Everywhere Sophia looked, she found evidence of a life built over generations. Success. Stability. Legacy. Things she had not experienced in years. Margaret guided her into a private sitting room overlooking the lake. Tea had already been prepared. Everything felt strangely orchestrated, as though someone had anticipated every detail of her arrival. Sophia finally spoke. Who are those children? Margaret lowered her teacup slowly. The question lingered between them. Outside, Emma and Ethan could be seen playing near the fountain. Their laughter floated faintly through the open windows. Margaret followed Sophia's gaze. A smile touched her lips. They are wonderful children. That is not what I asked. The older woman nodded. No, it is not. Silence settled across the room. Sophia leaned forward slightly. Why did they call me Mom? Margaret looked toward the lake. Her expression became thoughtful, almost sad. Because they have been looking at your photograph for years. Sophia felt the room tilt again. My photograph? Margaret rose from her chair and walked toward a nearby cabinet. She opened a drawer and carefully removed a silver picture frame. Without a word, she handed it to Sophia. The moment Sophia saw the image, every sound around her seemed to disappear. It was an old photograph, one she had never seen before. In it, a younger version of herself stood beside Alexander Hayes. Both were smiling. Both looked deeply happy. And written neatly on the back of the frame was a date from 7 years ago. A date that changed everything. Sophia could not take her eyes off the photograph. Her fingers tightened around the silver frame as memories she had spent years burying slowly resurfaced. 7 years earlier, she had stood beside Alexander Hayes at a charity event overlooking the Seattle waterfront. Back then, neither of them had imagined how quickly life could change. She remembered the way he listened when she spoke. The way he treated every person in the room with the same respect, whether they were investors or waiters. More than anything, she remembered how safe she felt around him. A feeling she had not experienced in a very long time. Margaret quietly returned to her chair. She seemed to understand. That Sophia needed a moment. Outside the window, Emma and Ethan continued playing beneath the afternoon sun. Their laughter drifted into the room like a melody from another life. I thought he disappeared, Sophia finally whispered. Margaret folded her hands together. Alexander did not disappear. Sophia looked up. Then why did he leave? The older woman's expression softened. Because he never knew where to find you. The answer stunned her. For years she had believed the opposite. After Alexander stopped calling, she assumed he had chosen a different path. A better path. One that did not include her. The silence that followed had eventually pushed her toward Ryan. A decision she had regretted more than once. Margaret stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the gardens. You were gone before Alexander returned from an overseas business trip. Every number he had for you was disconnected. Every address led nowhere. Sophia shook her head. That is impossible. Yet, even as she said the words, uncertainty crept into her voice. She remembered moving unexpectedly after losing her apartment. She remembered changing phone numbers during one particularly difficult period. At the time, she assumed none of it mattered. Margaret turned toward her. For months, he searched. Sophia stared at the older woman. The room suddenly felt smaller. The years between then and now no longer seemed as permanent as they once had. Then why am I here? She asked. Margaret smiled gently. Because some truths cannot remain hidden forever. Before Sophia could respond, the door opened. A housekeeper entered carrying a small stack of folders. She placed them carefully on a nearby table before leaving. Margaret selected one and handed it to Sophia. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Emma and Ethan at birthdays. Emma and Ethan learning to ride bicycles. Emma and Ethan opening Christmas gifts. Emma and Ethan standing beside a tall man whose face was never fully visible because he always seemed to be kneeling beside them, helping them, encouraging them. Sophia turned page after page. A lump formed in her throat. These children had lived entire lives she knew nothing about. Yet somehow every photograph made them feel more familiar. Then she reached the final image. Unlike the others, it was recent. Only a few months old. This time the man was fully visible. The folder slipped slightly in her hands. Alexander Hayes stood between the twins, one arm around each child. The years had changed him. He looked older, stronger, more confident. Yet his eyes were exactly the same. Sophia's heart skipped. At that exact moment, footsteps echoed from the hallway. Slow, steady, familiar. Margaret's smile widened ever so slightly. I believe, she said softly, the person you have been waiting 7 years to meet has finally come home. The footsteps grew louder. Each measured step echoed through the hallway with a confidence that only came from someone who had spent years carrying responsibility. Sophia rose slowly from her chair. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. 7 years of unanswered questions suddenly stood on the other side of a doorway. The room seemed impossibly quiet. Even the distant laughter of the children outside faded into the background. Then he appeared. Alexander Hayes stepped into the room and stopped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Time seemed to fold in on itself. The years between them disappeared beneath a single look. Sophia immediately recognized him. Not because he looked exactly the same. He did not. There were subtle lines at the corners of his eyes now. A quiet strength in his posture that had not been there before. Success had refined him, but it had not changed him. The kindness she remembered still lived in his eyes. Alexander stared at her as though he could hardly believe she was real. Sophia, he said softly. Hearing her name in his voice again sent a wave of emotion through her chest. It was the first time in years that anyone had spoken her name like it mattered. Sophia swallowed hard. Alexander. Neither moved closer. Neither knew how. 7 years of absence could not be crossed in a single step. Margaret quietly left the room, understanding that this conversation belonged to them alone. Silence settled once more. Finally, Alexander glanced toward the photograph, still resting in Sophia's hands. I wondered if you would recognize it. Sophia looked down at the frame. I never knew this picture existed. Alexander nodded. Neither did I until years later. He walked toward the window overlooking the lake. His expression grew thoughtful. I searched for you. Sophia felt her throat tighten. Margaret told me. Alexander stared across the water. For almost a year. The words landed heavily. Sophia remembered the months after he vanished. The confusion. The disappointment. The belief that she had simply been forgotten. I thought you left. Alexander turned toward her immediately. I thought you did. Their eyes met. In that instant, both understood the tragedy of what had happened. Neither had abandoned the other. Life had simply pulled them apart while each believed the other had chosen to leave. Sophia looked away first. 7 years is a long time. Alexander's smile carried sadness. It is. Then his gaze softened. But not long enough to forget you. Before Sophia could respond, the door suddenly burst open. Emma and Ethan rushed inside. Dad. Both children threw themselves toward Alexander. His entire expression changed. The billionaire. The businessman. The powerful man who commanded an empire vanished instantly. In his place stood a father. He knelt down and wrapped his arms around both children. The sight caught Sophia completely off guard. Genuine love radiated from the simple gesture. Alexander looked at the twins and smiled. Were you causing trouble? No, Ethan said proudly. We found Mom. The room fell silent. Emma nodded enthusiastically. We told her. Sophia froze. Alexander's expression shifted. Not surprise. Not confusion. Something closer to acceptance. As though he had known this moment would come eventually. Slowly, he stood. Then he looked directly at Sophia. His next words changed everything. They called you Mom because they have spent 7 years hearing stories about you. Sophia stared at him. Her heart nearly stopped. Alexander's voice remained calm. Gentle. Certain. Because, Sophia, Emma and Ethan are your children. The words hung in the air long after Alexander spoke them. Sophia stared at him, unable to process what she had just heard. Emma and Ethan remained beside him, completely unaware that their world had shifted in a matter of seconds. The twins looked from Alexander to Sophia with hopeful expressions, as though they had been waiting for this moment their entire lives. Sophia's knees felt weak. She lowered herself into the nearest chair without taking her eyes off the children. Her children. The thought seemed impossible. Yet the more she looked at them, the harder it became to deny. The familiar eyes. The expressions. The small details she had instinctively noticed from the beginning. Alexander sat across from her. His voice remained calm, but there was emotion beneath every word. 7 years ago, after you disappeared, I eventually learned something neither of us should have been forced to learn separately. Sophia struggled to speak. What are you talking about? Alexander glanced toward the twins before answering. After you left Seattle, there was an accident involving a private fertility clinic. Sophia frowned. The memory surfaced immediately. Years ago, during a routine medical procedure, she had participated in a fertility preservation program before accepting a temporary overseas work opportunity. It had seemed like a responsible decision at the time. Something distant. Something for the future. She had almost forgotten about it entirely. Alexander nodded slowly. The clinic later discovered a catastrophic administrative error involving stored reproductive materials. Sophia felt her heart begin to race. Every piece of the puzzle seemed to move closer to forming a picture she was not sure she wanted to see. Alexander. His eyes met hers. Your biological materials and mine were mistakenly matched through a series of failures that should never have happened. The room fell silent. Even the twins sensed the seriousness of the conversation. Emma quietly took Ethan's hand. Sophia stared at Alexander. The explanation sounded unbelievable. Yet something about his expression left no room for doubt. When the truth was finally discovered, he continued, the clinic contacted me first because I was listed in their records. By then, the twins had already been born. Through a legally protected arrangement. The situation became incredibly complicated. Sophia covered her mouth with one hand. Years of unanswered questions suddenly collided at once. And you never told me? Alexander's face tightened with regret. I tried. He stood and walked toward a nearby cabinet. Moments later, he returned carrying a thick folder. Inside were copies of letters, emails, investigator reports, and certified mail receipts. Evidence of years spent searching. Sophia turned page after page. Every document told the same story. Alexander had hired investigators, contacted former employers, tracked old addresses. Every lead ended in failure. Every attempt arrived too late. Tears blurred her vision. I never knew. Alexander's voice softened. I know. Across the room, Emma slowly approached Sophia. The little girl climbed into the chair beside her and carefully placed a small hand over hers. Such a simple gesture. Yet it shattered the last of Sophia's defenses. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks. Emma smiled gently. Dad always said you were kind. Sophia let out a trembling laugh through her tears. Alexander looked away briefly, overcome by emotion himself. For 7 years, 3 lives had existed separately when they should have been together. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected across the lake. Inside the mansion, a family that had been divided by mistakes, distance, and silence was finally beginning to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, across the city, Ryan Carter was about to learn exactly who the mysterious buyer truly was. And when he discovered the identity of the man he had tried to use for his own gain, he would realize that everything he thought he controlled had already slipped beyond his reach. Across the city, Ryan Carter sat alone inside a nearly empty office that no longer felt like his. The room had once represented ambition. Expensive furniture. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Awards displayed neatly on shelves. Now most of it was gone. Creditors had taken what they could. Investors had disappeared. Even longtime business partners had stopped returning his calls. The only thing left was silence. Ryan stared at his phone as another message appeared on the screen. Past due. Final notice. Immediate response required. He deleted it without reading the rest. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. Before he could answer, the office door opened. His attorney stepped inside carrying a thick folder. The man's expression immediately made Ryan uneasy. Tell me you have good news, Ryan said. The attorney remained standing. I do not. Ryan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. What now? The folder landed on the desk. Do you remember the agreement you signed regarding Sophia? Ryan's eyes opened instantly. What about it? The buyer has been identified. Ryan sat upright. For days he had been trying to learn the mysterious investor's identity. Every inquiry had led nowhere. Every contact refused to answer questions. Whoever was behind the transaction operated at a level far beyond Ryan's reach. Who is it? The attorney hesitated. Alexander Hayes. The name struck like lightning. Ryan stared at him. Surely he had heard wrong. Alexander Hayes? The attorney nodded. Founder and chief executive officer of Hayes Global Holdings. Ryan felt his stomach drop. Everyone knew the name. Alexander Hayes was one of the most influential businessmen in the country. Newspapers covered his acquisitions. Financial channels analyzed his decisions. Entire industries reacted when he made a move. Ryan suddenly understood why every door had closed in his face. He had not been negotiating with an ordinary investor. He had been standing in the path of a billionaire. That is impossible, Ryan whispered. The attorney opened the folder and slid several documents across the desk. Corporate filings, ownership records, legal correspondence. Every page confirmed the same reality. Ryan's hands trembled slightly. Then another thought surfaced. Why would someone like him care about Sophia? The attorney's expression grew even more uncomfortable. There is more. Ryan already hated the sound of those words. The attorney took a slow breath. Alexander Hayes is connected to 2 minor children currently under his guardianship. Ryan frowned. What does that have to do with me? The answer arrived immediately. The attorney did not even need to say it. A photograph rested near the top of the file. Ryan picked it up. His face lost all color. In the image, Sophia stood beside Alexander on the grounds of a massive estate. Nearby, Emma and Ethan smiled at the camera. The resemblance was unmistakable. Ryan's pulse thundered in his ears. Suddenly, everything made sense. The fear, the secrecy, the strange reactions from everyone involved. He had not merely crossed paths with a billionaire. He had inserted himself into a story that began long before he arrived. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Sophia walked through the gardens with Emma and Ethan. The twins eagerly pointed out their favorite places. A treehouse overlooking the lake. A small dock where they fed ducks every Saturday morning. A garden bench where Alexander read to them before bedtime. Every story added another piece to a life she never knew existed. As the sun slowly descended toward the horizon, Sophia glanced toward the mansion. Alexander stood on a distant terrace watching them. Not intruding. Not rushing. Simply allowing her the time she deserved. For the first time in years, Sophia felt something unfamiliar settling into her heart. Peace. The kind of peace that arrives only when the truth finally steps out of the shadows. 3 months later, the first warm days of spring arrived in Seattle. Sunlight danced across the surface of the lake as Emma and Ethan raced down a wooden dock, their laughter echoing across the water. The world felt different now. Lighter. Calmer. The long shadows that had followed so many lives for years had finally begun to fade. Sophia stood near the shoreline holding 2 cups of lemonade. The breeze lifted strands of her hair as she watched the twins argue playfully about who would spot the first duck of the afternoon. Every few seconds, one of them turned to make sure she was still there. And every time they did, Sophia smiled. Because now she was. No longer a photograph. No longer a mystery. No longer a missing piece in someone else's story. Alexander stepped beside her carrying a picnic basket. His expression softened as he followed her gaze toward the children. Neither spoke immediately. They did not need to. Some moments were too meaningful for unnecessary words. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt earned. Built from truth instead of assumptions. Built from patience instead of fear. Sophia looked out across the lake. I still wake up expecting all of this to disappear. Alexander smiled. So do I. They shared a quiet laugh. The kind that only comes after surviving something difficult. Nearby, Margaret sat beneath a flowering tree reading a book while occasionally glancing toward her grandchildren. Peace had settled over the estate in ways she had not experienced in years. For the first time, everyone who belonged together was finally in the same place. Across town, Ryan Carter sat alone at a small outdoor cafe. His expensive office was gone. His luxury apartment was gone. The endless chase for status and shortcuts had finally reached its inevitable conclusion. Yet what weighed on him most was not the money. It was the realization that he had spent years overlooking what truly mattered. He stared at a newspaper folded beside his coffee. A photograph accompanied a business article about Alexander Hayes and a major charitable initiative benefiting families and children. Standing beside Alexander in the image was Sophia. Emma and Ethan stood in front of them smiling brightly. Ryan studied the photograph for a long time. Not with anger. Not even with jealousy. Only regret. Eventually, he folded the newspaper and looked away. Some mistakes could not be undone. Some opportunities never returned. Back at the estate, the afternoon slowly turned golden. Emma and Ethan ran toward the picnic blanket carrying handfuls of wildflowers. For Mom, Emma announced proudly. Sophia accepted the flowers as though they were the most valuable gift in the world. Ethan immediately handed Alexander a slightly crushed flower of his own. For Dad, Alexander accepted it with equal seriousness. The children laughed. Sophia watched the scene unfold and felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Home. Not a house. Not a place. A feeling. The feeling of finally standing exactly where she belonged. As the sun began its slow descent beyond the lake, Alexander reached for her hand. Not dramatically. Not as a grand gesture. Simply as a natural extension of everything they had rebuilt together. Sophia looked at him and smiled. Years ago, life had separated them through misunderstanding, distance, and circumstances neither could control. But somehow the truth had found its way back. The twins continued chasing each other across the grass. Margaret watched proudly from beneath the tree. The lake reflected the colors of the evening sky. And standing in the center of it all, Sophia realized something important. The man who once tried to use her future to solve his problems had unknowingly delivered her back to the life she was always meant to find. Sometimes justice does not arrive as punishment. Sometimes it arrives as happiness. And on that peaceful spring evening, surrounded by the family she never knew she had been missing, Sophia finally understood the difference.